We've been studying the Rashba and trying to figure out, based on the Rashba, why Rava in Masechta Shabbos Chof Gimel and Beis comes to the conclusion that if you have a choice between buying shemen l'ner Chanukah and wine for Kiddush, then Rava vacillated originally, and he came to the conclusion at the very end that he should buy shemen l'ner Chanukah because of Pirsum Hanes. And the Rashba explains that although he could be Yotze with Pas, he doesn't need Yayin, but there's a mitzvah min muvchar to make Kiddush ala Yayin. And Rava was vacillating whether the mitzvah min muvchar on Kiddush, which is a mitzvah d'oraisa, should trump the mitzvah d'Rabbanan of Ner Chanukah. And the final conclusion of Rava was that although Kiddush is a mitzvah d'oraisa, but he could be Yotze with Pas, Elawat, the mitzvah min muvchar would encourage him to use Yayin. But that discrepancy between the basic mitzvah and the mitzvah min muvchar is not enough to tip the scale and override the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah, because the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah is so powerful that it has the dimension of Pirsumei Nisa. So that's what we saw in the Rashba. we tried to explain that according to the Rashba, it could very well be that the mitzvah min muvchar, in this case of Yayin over Pas, is greater than what we call Hidur mitzvah, derived in general for many mitzvahs from Zeh Keli Me'avehu, because the mitzvah of Hidur in general, derived from Zeh Keli, enhances the act of the mitzvah. It beautifies the Netilas Lulav and the Achilas Matzah, whatever the Maisa might be. But it doesn't really effectuate any fundamental change in the mitzvah itself. The fabric of the mitzvah remains the same. You just enhance it and up it by one level. So therefore, one could argue that if we were only dealing with Hidur mitzvah, then the discrepancy between the basic mitzvah of Kiddush al Pas and the Hidur mitzvah of Yayin would not be enough to justify that we give up on a mitzvah as important as Ner Chanukah. But since mitzvah min muvchar comes way beyond Hidur mitzvah, and it might affect a change in the mitzvah itself. We're no longer just trying to enhance and beautify, upgrade the Maisa mitzvah, but we're adding a whole new element into the mitzvah by fulfilling the mitzvah min muvchar of Yayin. And that element we discussed is Shira, because the Gemara says in Brachos that Ein Shira Ela Al Hayayin. And it could very well be that the kiyum of Shira, which in its original form of Ein Shira Ela Yayin is Nisach Hayayin, the Levium and the libations in the base of English, it could be that kiyum is in the carbon itself. And the Gemara has a debate in Masechta Erchin whether or not the halacha of Shir al Yayin applies when you don't have a carbon, you just have Nisuch. Because you could have a carbon that's accompanied by Nisuch, you could have a mitzvah of Nisuch in and of itself. And according to one opinion, the halacha of Yayin and Shir al Yayin applies even without a carbon. And it could be that the yayin that is being poured on the mizbeach itself has to be poured. And that's what we call the kiyum in the chefta. And if we apply that same principle of Ein Shir Al Yayin to the yayin of Kiddush, then there's a din in the yayin itself. The yayin itself, so to speak, cries out or begs to be drunk, to have shtia. And that's an extra element, an extra dimension in the mitzvah of Kiddush. So we're not just talking about Hidur mitzvah, we're going beyond that. In fact, I want to reiterate what I said a week ago, and that is that although Zrizus, which I think Rabbi David wrote a book on that topic anyway, Zrizus takes precedence over Hidur mitzvah, and therefore we don't usually delay a mitzvah in order to accomplish Hidur mitzvah. So let's say, for example, you could be Yotzei Ner Chanukah with one candle, but about an hour from now, somebody's going to bring you more candles, and it'll be a greater Hidur mitzvah, Keneged Anshe Habayis, whatever it might be. Then the pretty well accepted approach in the poskim is that you don't delay a mitzvah. We don't delay mitzvahs. But we said that the Chassam Sofer, in justifying why Moshe Rabbeinu delayed Milah of his sons, was because he needed a certain tool which he didn't have, which was made of barzel. And even though you could do and accomplish the Milah without barzel, which is exactly the initiative of Tzipora, and she took a tzur, that point of a stone, but nevertheless Moshe Rabbeinu held that the difference between barzel for Milah and tzur for Milah is not just the difference between basic mitzvah and Hidur mitzvah, but it's a wide gap, because it's a difference between a mitzvah and a mitzvah min muvchar, and therefore for the sake of a mitzvah min muvchar, Moshe Rabbeinu delayed the Milah. That was his shita. Now, what I want to cover with you today, and it's very much along these lines and the same framework, is the shita of the Tosfot Rid. The Tosfot Rid is of the opinion that if you want to know something about Yayin L'Kidush and its significance, then you really should start not with the sugya in Shabbos, in which we compare Yayin to Shemen in Ner Chanukah, but rather to a sugya in Nazir, because the sugya in Nazir says that when it comes to Yayin L'Kidush, the way the Tosfot Rid has it in our Girsa, then the Nazir will drink the Yayin of Kiddush. And why is that? Because Mushba v'omed me'ar Sinai. In other words, when the Torah was given at Sinai, and Zochras Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, included in that mitzvah of Zoch Yom HaKadsho is Yayin. And therefore, when the Nazir takes upon himself Nazirus, which generates an Isur in the Chefts of Yayin, it doesn't apply to Yayin of Kiddush. That's the way the Tosfot Rid has the Gemara in Masechta Nazir Daf Gimel and Beis Daf Daled and Alf Mushba v'Yom Me'ar Sinai, that Yayin in Kiddush is Me'ar Sinai. And he quotes the Mefarish, and he quotes the Sefer Paris of Rashi. And we see this also in the Rashba and the Ran. Many Rishonim seems to say that Kiddush al Yayin is Doraisa. Comes along the Tosfot Rid and asks the question, where in the Torah does it say that you have to recite Kiddush al Yayin? And he comes up with a fascinating revolution. He says it's halacha l'Moshe miSinai. So Moshe Rabbeinu up at Har Sinai got this mitzvah orally. The mitzvah itself of Zoch Yom HaKadosh is in the Torah, but the way and the method by which we fulfill the mitzvah, namely with Yayin, that was given to Moshe at Har Sinai. Hence, Yayin is Doraisa, and Mushba v'Yom Me'ar Sinai now generates a principle called Mushba v'Yom Me'ar Sinai. So it's always Har Sinai. We're always coming back to Har Sinai, whether it's Halacha Moshe miSinai, whether it's Mushba v'Yom Me'ar Sinai. We always go back to Sinai, and we all took an oath at Har Sinai. In this case, through Moshe Rabbeinu's teachings, that we would recite Kiddush al Yayin and then drink the cup of wine. And therefore, since he accepted upon himself that shvuah way back in Har Sinai, now when he accepts upon himself Nazirus, the Nazirus will not be chal, it won't take effect on the Yayin of Kiddush. That's the Tosfot Rid. Now, generally speaking, when we talk about halacha l'Moshe miSinai, although admittedly it's not in the Torah shebechsav, by the way, we just made a transition from the fourth to the fifth week of the Omer. The fourth week of the Omer, according to the Bali Kabbalah, is Netzach, and the fifth week of the Omer is Hod. And Chazal say that each one of the 7 weeks of the Omer represents a different personality in Jewish history, in the Avos and so forth. And Netzach is representative of Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's called Torah Shebechsav, the written Torah. Now we're already beyond that. We're in the fifth week of the Omer. That's the week of Hod. and that's represented by Aaron, because Aaron is the first who ever derived the halacha from a Kal Vachomer, which is called Torah Sheba'al Peh. So we went from Torah Sheba'al to Torah Sheba'al Peh, from Netzach to Hod. And a halacha Moshe Sinai is Torah Sheba'al Peh, even though it came from Moshe Rabbeinu. So it's the exception to the rule that Moshe Rabbeinu gives us the Torah Sheba'al. In addition, he gave us certain halachas, which is called halacha Moshe Sinai, and that's Torah Sheba'al Peh. But be that as it may, we always assume, no one ever questioned this premise, that halacha Moshe Sinai is Doraisa. It's not written in the Torah per se, but it has the same status as everything else that was given at Har Sinai. And therefore, the Tosfot Rid says that Mushba V'Yomim Har Sinai is going to apply to the Yayin of Kiddush, because the halacha Moshe Sinai tells me to recite Kiddush al Yayin, and hence I took the Shvu at Har Sinai to make Kiddush al Yayin. Now, when he accepts the Nazirus is not chal on the Yayin of Kiddush. That's the Tosfot Rid. Now, I have the Tosfot Rid in front of me, and I want to point out that he adds something very important. A couple of points that he adds here that should be emphasized. Number one, he says that ein kiddush ela b'meshu kovea su'udaso o b'pas o b'yayin. Now, watch this. When we were talking about the Rashba and we introduced the svara of mitzvah and muvchar, we were talking about yayin as opposed to pas, meaning that even if you have pas, you might want to make kiddush al yayin in order to introduce and inject the extra kiyum of shir al yayin. And that's called a mitzvah min muvchar, which might even tip the scale in Ravas Havavin at least against shemen l'ner Chanukah. But in the Tosfot Rid, we're not talking about mitzvah min muvchar. In fact, we're not even talking about yayin being superior to pas. He says yayin or pas or yayin. There's no difference between the two. Why? Because he says that the halacha requires kiddush shu kovea sudaso. So if the kiddush is going to be effective to be koveh suda, then you don't need yayin. You could be koveh suda al pas, and therefore yayin and pas are equal in the perspective of the Tosfot Rid. But then he adds another few words that, for the time being, I'm going to just leave it hanging. I'll read it to you, and maybe we'll come back to it. He says, "Tichsiv." How do you know that through kiddush you're being koveh yasuda on either pas or yayin? The pasuk says v'karasel Shabbos oneg. Now let's keep in mind. Anybody remember where this pasuk is? Oh yeah, we don't have time for answers here, but it's in Yeshayahu Hanavi. It's what you call divrei Kabbalah. But he's deriving a halacha d'oraisa that is so powerful that it'll undermine the chiyuv malchus on a nazir for drinking wine. He's deriving it from this pasuk, v'karasel Shabbos oneg. This appellant that has to be understood. And then, how do we understand v'karasel Shabbos oneg? Again, a pasuk in Kabbalah. B'makom kriya sham yehei oneg. A lot of gibberish here, a lot of words here. B'makom kriya sham yehei oneg. So the whole thing. Anyway, going on in the Tosfot Rid, he says the following: that the Nazir is chayiv to make kiddush on Friday night. He says, if all things are equal, let him make kiddush al pas, and he'll be yotzei because pas equals yayin, and he's koveh suda al pas, and he doesn't have to override and violate the shti of yayin. But me'achar v'kiddush al yayin, and he adds one word miher v'kiddush al yayin, like as if to say he jumped the gun, and on his own, whim, the Nazir decided, I'm not going to make kiddush al pas, I'm going to make kiddush al yayin, for no apparent reason. Is then, says the Tosfot, nischayev lishtos. Even though he's a Nazir, he becomes obligated. Why? Because he was mekadesh b'yayin, the near v'kiddush al yayin. Another point that's really needs a lot of work. And then he says, v'afagav. He said, v'hadatanya zochreu al yayin. And the Gemara brings a brisa in Perak Arvei Psochim that you could kind of mitzvah zocher to Shabbos zocher al yayin. He lekadesh al yayin min Torah. This is not some sort of rabbinic asmachta. According to Tosfot Rid, this is the mitzvah of קידוש מן התורה, לקדש על יין. ואף אגב לא כתיב יין בקרא. And again, it's very nice that Chazal told us and revealed to us that Zochrei al Yain, you should make Kiddush al Yain, but and now we're saying it's Min Torah. Where'd they get it from? They pulled the card out of here. Where's the wild card? Says the Tosfot Rid, Kach kibel Moshe b'Sinai, titzorach lekadish al Yain o al apas, v'gam hi chashuva ki yain. So that's kibel Moshe b'Sinai. But I want to add another point here that I found in the Tosfot Rid. He says the following.
Sorry, Rav, just a quick question. He doesn't mention anywhere that the wine has to be drunk. That it could be that the wine has to be drunk. We have that. He doesn't have to drink it, that somebody else. It seems like he's saying.
It seems that he, according to Tosfot Rid, Halacha Moshe Sinai, it's not enough these Makadesh al Yain, he has to drink the wine.
Why is it that he's saying that he's going against the idea that it's the wine that has to be drunk, not necessarily that he has to drink it? Right? We do have that situation. He's
rejecting that idea because he has Halacha Moshe Sinai that he has to drink the wine. Now, there's another point here in the Tosfot Rid, which I wanted to call to your attention. And he says the following. And the Gemara in Nazir says that lesar yayin mitzvah ki yayin reshus umahi. So what is this yayin mitzvah that we want to derive? Maybe that even yayin mitzvah is also to a nazir. Kiddusha va'avdalta. This is very interesting because when the Tosfot Rid describes the Halacha Moshe Sinai, he only mentions yayin lekiddush, but here in the opening paragraph, he equates Kiddush and Havdalah. Now, many Rishonim hold that Havdalah is the Rabbanan. A whole slew of Rishonim hold that Havdalah is the Oraisa. But very few Rishonim, you can hardly count them, count them on one finger. That's it, in one hand. They hold that Havdalah min Torah requires Yayin. So you're making a lot of jumps over here. Number one, you're assuming that Havdalah is Doraisa. Number two, you're assuming that Havdalah has to be on Yayin. Number three, you're assuming that you have to drink the wine. All this is a package Doraisa as far as Havdalah is concerned. So again, to say that Havdalah is Doraisa, I can accept that. Many Rishonim, the Rambam including, says that Havdalah is Doraisa. To say Havdalah has to be al Yayin, I don't know. That's a mouthful. And then to go a step further and say, well, you've got to drink the wine of the Havdalah. You can't give it to your child, even if it's the 9 days. That wouldn't be enough. So if you would have said to me, well, maybe the Tosfot Rid has that as all part of his Halacha Moshe Sinai, but it's not so. Because when he quotes Halacha Moshe Sinai, he writes Tzarech Lekadish al Yayin, and he only mentions Kiddush, completely omitting Havdalah. And you really get the impression that Havdalah al Yayin is, although it's Min Torah, and therefore the Nazir will drink the wine of Havdalah, but nevertheless it's not included in this halacha of Halacha Moshe Sinai, but maybe it has a life of its own, some sort of additional reason why Havdalah has to be al Yayin and why you have to drink the wine of Havdalah. So again, just to summarize, we have a couple of questions that we haven't answered over here. Number one, how does the Nazir drink the wine of Kiddush? Is the wine of Kiddush Doraisa? And the answer is yes, it's Doraisa. And then we have to ask a second question, is Pas equal to Yayin? And the answer is yes. So if Pas is equal to Yayin, and he can become in the midst of Kiddush Doraisa al Pas, why drink wine? And to this, the Tosfot Rid gives a very strange answer, because Mir v'Kiddush al Yayin, v'nischayev l'shtosa. Since he jumped into the bandwagon and he quickly decided he's going to make Kiddush al Yayin. Had he come to us, we would have encouraged him to take recite Kiddush al Pas. Okay, he chose Yayin, and that's enough to undermine the Iser Doraisa Chiv Malchus for Nazir drinking wine. Then we said that the Chiddush here of the Tosfot Rid is very different than that of the Rashba. The Rashba has Mitzvah and Amuvchar as precedence of Yayin over Pas, and the Tosfot Rid rejects that. He says Pas and Yayin are equal. Additionally, he says Likvoa Sudaso al Hayayin o al Pas. So he introduces another element here to the equation called Kviyas Suda. And on top of Tabut, he's got this whole business with Nazir even with regard to the Yayin of Havdalah. Okay. Now, our question for today, and this is a question that's been bothering me for a long time, is that once the Tosfot Rid establishes that Yayin o Pas is Doraisa in Kiddush, and it's derived from Halacha Moshe Sinai, then I would assume that Halacha Moshe Sinai has the same status as the Oraisa. And it's what you call a mitzvah gemura min Torah. It's a complete mitzvah min Torah to take Yayin or Pas for your Kiddush. It's not something secondary. It's Halacha Moshe Sinai. And Halacha Moshe Sinai, I grant you, would generate a mitzvah dorais, a chiyuv dorais. If that premise is correct, and I think I could prove it from many sugyas, just for example, one that comes in mind, it could be that the mitzvah of Arava on the seventh day of Sukkot is halacha Moshe Sinai, the tilas Arava, and yet it could be that we'll apply esei docha los haseh to allow someone, for the sake of the mitzvah of Arava, to violate a los haseh. Again, this is a different discussion. Maybe I'll share that with you on another occasion. But now we go back to the Gemara in Shabbos that we started with. Rava says, what comes first? Shemen l'ner Chanukah or Yayin l'Kiddush? I don't get it. We're talking about a Doraisa here. I mean, if he has Pas, then the whole question of Rava doesn't even begin. Because there's no difference between Pas and Yayin according to Tosfot Rid, so he'll make Kiddush al Pas. He's got bread, he's got a couple of loaves of bread in the freezer, and he'll take them out and he'll make Kiddush. And he can take all his money and spend it on Shemen l'ner Chanukah. Obviously, he doesn't have Pas. So he has neither Pas nor Yayin. Which means that according to Halacha Moshe Sinai of the Tosfot Rid, he's chayiv min Torah to be mekadesh, either al Yayin or al Pas. How could it be that Rava entertained the idea that a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, with all due respect to the mitzvah d'Rabbanan, could trump the mitzvah d'Oraisa of Kiddush? We never found that a d'Rabbanan could overcome a d'Oraisa. And not only that, Lamaskana Rava says, we will recommend or require that he buy the Shemen l'ner Chanukah. Which means that the bottom line of that sugya, according to Rava, and nobody seems to argue with Rava, is that if you're in this tight situation where you don't have Pas, you don't have Yayin, and if you buy one of those two, you won't have a penny in your piggy bank to purchase Shemen l'ner Chanukah, then spend that last dime on Shemen l'ner Chanukah. So the first thought that occurred to me is that maybe we're underestimating the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. Maybe it's much more profound than we think it is. The Gemara also applies the same logic in a case where he needs the money to buy Shemen for Ner Shabbos. And the Gemara says that Ner Shabbos is Shalom Bayis, and therefore it trumps the mitzvah of Kiddush. But we're talking, according to Tosfot Rid, of a mitzvah d'Oraisa. So perhaps we have to upgrade, Shalom Bayis and Ner Shabbos and maybe call it a d'Oraisa. That's pretty wild. I mean, if you tapped someone on the back, somebody in Toronto, one of the great Rosh Yeshiva in Toronto, and I'm finding out from David here that there are many of them. Of course, we can't get to one of them, but that's a different problem. and tap him on the back and tell him that Ner Shabbos is Doraisa or Ner Chanukah is Doraisa. If he's a half a brisker, he'll kick you out of the base medrash on the spot. Because we know clearly that Ner Shabbos is a Takonis Chachamim. We know clearly that Ner Chanukah is a Takonis Chachamim. Nowhere in the Torah does it say light a candle on Erev Shabbos. Nowhere in the Torah does it say light a candle on Chanukah. So it's all a Takonis D'Rabbanan. So how could that Takonis D'Rabbanan, I hate to use the word Trump, but okay, until a week ago I didn't mind that word, but now I say Ein Lanu Lismoch El Avinu Shebashamayim. But how could it be that Ner Chanukah which is the Rabbanan, would override a mitzvah d'oraisa that's derived from Halacha Moshe Sinai of Yayin or Pas for Kiddush? And therefore, I'd like to suggest, according to Tosfot Rid, that Ner Shabbos is d'oraisa. If he can design. So the answer, I think, lies in Rashi. Rashi says, in explaining Ner Shabbos, that Machmas HaChoshech, because it's very dark out on Shabbos, and clearly he cannot light, any candles, is Yesh Lachshov Shemi Yitokel. He might trip and fall. So I think I mentioned to you that too many of my associates, people of my age bracket, have tripped and fallen, and it's almost like kaput. You know what I mean by kaput? It's like unbelievable. The most dangerous disease, I think, for older people is not cancer, not heart disease. I think it's tripping and falling. So thank God my brother-in-law, after half a year, just got out of the hospital. Half a year in the hospital because he tripped and he fell. So you got to make sure you hold on to this. So I'm thinking to myself, the Torah says, "Ushmartem yodas nafsho seichem," and that's a mitzvah d'oraisa, and let's count it in Taryag. Yeah, but how do you fulfill that mitzvah? So generally speaking, the Torah relies upon a person's intuition, and he naturally knows how to be careful and what precautions he should take in order not to endanger his life. But in the case of Shabbos, because of today we have Shabbos clocks, we have electricity, but back in the day, Shabbos was such a dangerous day in a sense. David HaMelech died on Shabbos, but it's a dangerous day because it's pitch black, and you can't light a candle, and certainly not a flashlight on your cell phone. So what are you going to do? So the Rabbanan said that in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Ushmartem yodas nafsho seichem, we're going to obligate you to light a candle, Erev Shabbos. Now, I'm not getting into the details about what kind of candle and how long it has to burn and so forth and so on, where you place it. But fundamentally, we could understand that it would be justifiable to upgrade Ner Shabbos to a higher level. We think that Shalom Bayis in Ner Shabbos, is about, love between a husband and wife. Forget about all that stuff. That's good for the social workers and so forth and so on. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about Pikuach Nefesh. We're talking about lighting a candle. And the word Shalom here means harmony, in the sense that, you know where you're going and what you're doing, and you're not tripping and falling and banging into this and that because you lit a candle. Possibly. What about Ner Chanukah? Could it be that Ner Chanukah is d'oraisa? Well, the Torah says, "V'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael," and it's a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. What, when, how, who? When do I have to be Mekadosh Shem Shemayim? I have to publicize God's miracles. When, how? And the Rabbanan will come along, if you pardon the baseball language, they'll step up to the plate, and they will determine when and how I will fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. Once they make that determination, that you have to fulfill Kiddush Hashem through Persume Nisa on the eight days of going from Chaf Hey Kislev all the way up to Gimel Tevis, whatever it might be, then it becomes a mitzvah d'oraisa. Okay, look, is that what the Tosfot Rid understood in the Gemara in Shabbos? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. So when I told the shtickle Torah over to my chavrusa, who I haven't learned with in like 50 years, but we started picking it up a little bit now on Zoom. His name is Alan, or Yehuda Dubin, for those of you who might know him. And I told it over to him, so he says to me, wait a minute, in Ner Chanukah, the Gemara in Shabbos says, Heichon Tzivanu, how can you make a bracha, Asher Kidshonim Tosfot Tzivanu, on Ner Chanukah? It's only D'Rabbanan. And you Burzon want to say, no, it's a Chiv Doraisa. What do you mean, Heichon Tzivanu? It's a Doraisa. So I thought that was a brilliant kasha. I have a teretz that kasha, but we'll leave it for now. Ain't come. Yeah, David.
Okay, so two things. So first of all, if you claim that Ner Shabbos is a kiyum of Mishmartim Oila Nafshei Seichem, it's also a kiyum of Leisasim Dam V'Secha.
Oh, good. So
Yeah,
that's a very good point. Yeah, that could even strengthen my argument.
Right.
Rabbanan said that if you don't light a Shabbos candle on Erev Shabbos, then it's Domim V'Secha.
Exactly. Okay. Number two, with the Tosfot Rid, you might argue that he says Mir v'Kiddush Shel Pas is only b'diavad, meaning the Chetchila, he doesn't say you have two options, choose one or the other. He said, oh, the guy just did it, so is he Yotzer or not Yotzer? Is he Chiyav Malchus, not Chiyav Malchus? He says, no, you're behind the mitzvah, and he gets no Malchus. So it looks like you can read into the Rid, it's only b'diavad.
So I'm not sure I heard everything you said, David, but I did hear the word b'diavad, so I'm going to pick up on that word. You want to say it again, or?
Okay, sure. Because
you have to scream it out. You have to scream it out.
The language Tosfot Rid says Mir v'Kiddush Shel Pas, right? So that means b'diavad, meaning l'chatchila he might not. He would say l'chatchila do it on bread because that's definitely okay. B'diavad, if you did it, fine, you don't get malchus. So it doesn't seem like they're on equal footing, bread and wine.
Right. You're definitely correct that the Tosfot Rid in the case of a Nazir advocates that he made Kiddush al Pas. There's no question about that. Okay. But he says if he already made Kiddush and he took the wine and he was Mihir and he Kiddush, then he has to drink the wine. Okay. I just want to point out, I don't know if you heard in your lifetime, you ever heard of someone, he's gone already about 15 years, his name was Rabbi Ephraim Greenblatt.
Yeah.
He wrote like massive volumes of tshuvas called Rivavos Ephraim.
Right.
So in the Rivavos Ephraim, he has an interesting shaila. He wants to know what happens if a person doesn't remember, did I light Ner Chanukah? Did I not light Ner Chanukah? So you and I would have said, without opening the tshuva of the Rivavos Ephraim, that it's Sofek D'Rabbanan L'Kula. However, he says no. This is like a Sofek D'Oraisa. And he says, why? Because of the significance of Pirsum Hanes. Now, again, this may be a stretch, and if he were alive, I would call him up and ask him. I think he lived in Memphis, if I remember correctly. He was Talmud Rav Moshe Feinstein, but he learned by all the Gedolim in his time, and he had communications with them. Anyway, I would ask him, Rabbi Greenblatt, do you have in mind the Tosfot Rid, who on the one hand says that Kiddush al Yain is Doraisa, and yet on the other hand, the Gemara establishes that he will forego the mitzvah of Kiddush for the sake of the mitzvah Ner Chanukah because of Pirsumei Nisa. Maybe that would be the basis of your psak, that we can't say Sofek D'Rabbanan L'Kula Ner Chanukah. On the contrary, we're going to say Sofek D'Oraisa L'Chumra because Pirsum Hanes upgrades Ner Chanukah to a Doraisa.
Wait a second. What's your shaila? What are you worried about? So light another Chanukah candle. You don't have to make a bracha.
Right, but I think he says you do make the bracha, but that's not important, Bobby. The question is, how far do I have to go for this? If it's something D'Rabbanan L'Kula, then okay, go light another candle. But you have to travel, from Toronto to New York in order to get yourself a candle. I don't know. It's just. But he's saying no, Mikra Din. You have to be machbir.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought that we could approach the Tosfot Rid from a whole nother angle, and I'm going to grant you that Ner Shabbos is only D'Rabbanan, and Ner Chanukah is only D'Rabbanan. But instead of upgrading Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah, I would like to, so to speak, downgrade Halacha L'Moshe B'Sinai. What I'd like to suggest is that since it's not in the Torah itself, but rather it's transmitted orally, then we're going to find many kulos in Halacha L'Moshe B'Sinai. And I'll try to mention a few of those. First of all, it's fascinating that although the Rabbanan established that we should take the Arava, because that's what they did in the Mikdash, But yet, I'm not talking about the Arava with the other minim, right? Obviously. But nevertheless, we take the Arava only on the 7th day. What we call Hoshana Rabbah. So the poskim say, I don't get it. If we took the Arav and the Beis Hamikdash every single day of, and the Mishnayos in Sukkah describe what they did with the Arava, and we did that every single day for 7 days in Hanukkah. I'm sorry, 7 days in Sukkot. So once the Mikdash was destroyed, and now we want to duplicate the mitzvah of Arava as it was done in the Mikdash, why is it that we only take the Arava on the 7th day? And the answers that I found all come to the same point, that the entire institution of Arava, even when the Beis Hamikdash stood, is all halacha Moshe Sinai. Nowhere in the Torah does it say take the Arava. It says take the 4 minim, right? But the Arava, as a separate mitzvah of Netilah, that we don't find. And this was given to us by the Nevi'im. And apparently it goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu. So here we see a case. Again, I don't want to make too big of a deal of this case. I have other cases I think are even better, where the halacha bends over and is more lenient because it's halacha Moshe Sinai. In other words, had a Rava on a daily basis in Mikdash been written in the Torah itself, then no doubt, according to these Rishonim, we would have a minute to take the Arava every single day. But since the Arava is not written in the Torah, it's only halacha Moshe Sinai. There's not even a remez to Arava in the Torah. Therefore, we can be makel. And they chose the 7th day for whatever reason. Yeah. Yeah, Joe. What do you want to say?
I don't know how. I'm just trying to understand how you're basing this stuff on the Arava, whereas that was a mitzvah only in the Beis Hamikdash. With the way we're doing it, it's really only as a zecher. It wasn't a mitzvah for Bnei Yisrael.
So that's what I'm telling you, Joe. The Mefarshim say that if Arava would have been written in the Torah, then the Zeichel of Mikdash would have taken us from A to Z, the whole 9 yards. We would have to take the Arava every day. The reason why we would make it and take the Arava only one day is because the original Arava in the Beis Hamikdash was only a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Let me give another few examples. The Rambam in Hilchos Shchita Perek Hey has a list of 8 treifos. Now, one of those treifos is called a drusa, which means that the animal, got smashed on the ground, and therefore you can't shecht it and eat it. The meat is treif. But the Rambam says the following: that there's a fundamental difference between drusa, which is one of the 8, and the other 7. Whereas drusa is in the Torah itself, the other 7 are only halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Says the Rambam, therefore, if you have a suffix treifa, then it depends what your suffix is. If it's a suffix drusa, lahachmir. If it's a suffix of one of the other 7 categories of treifos, then mekilim we go l'kula. Why? Because halacha Moshe Sinai. Now wait a second. You and I know that on a deraisa halacha it's suffix deraisa l'chumra, and yet the Rambam is saying no. In this deraisa, the 7 categories of treifos, because it's halacha Moshe Sinai, it's suffix l'kula, and the only exception is drusa, because drusa is written in the Torah. So why do I bring you Hilchos Shchita? Because you see clearly that halacha Moshe Sinai is not a mitzvah gemura. It's not to be elevated and equated to the status of all doraisas. It falls a little bit shy of a doraisa. And then Nafkamina is going to be a suffix. Now I want to quote to you another Rambam. And by the way, whenever I'm telling you for the Rambam, you can find another Rishonim. I got it from the Rambam. There's a Rambam in Hilchos Mikvos. You and I know that a mikveh has to have 40 saw. What happens is, he's got 20 saw here and 20 saw here in 2 different receptacles, large kelim. and there's a kotel that divides these two. So you and I would say, well, wait a minute. You can't do a tefillah here, you can't do a tefillah there, because neither of them have 40 saw, correct? So the Rambam says, but if there's a nekev, there's some sort of a hole that allows the water to go from one side to the other. The Rambam says in such a case, you could be tovil in either one of these two receptacles, because we view it as one, as if you have a total of 40 saw. And the Rambam says that the shear of a nekev is X, Y, and Z. We'll go through it. It's very complicated. And it's halacha Moshe Misin. So then the Rambam goes on to say, what happens if I have a suffix about this nekev? I don't know if it has the shear or if it doesn't have the shear. The Rambam says you have to be machmir. Says the Rambam, but wait a minute. The shear is only halacha Moshe Misinai. Says the Rambam name, because this shear halacha Moshe Misinai is telling you about the mikvah, which lends itself or doesn't lend itself to tvila, and tvila is ikar min haTorah. So there's something amazing going on in this Rambam. The Rambam is assuming that if not for reason X, we would be makil in a case of a suffix nekev, because it's only halacha Moshe Misinai. The only reason we're machmir is because the ikar tvila, the concept of being tovil in the mikveh to remove your tumah, that's doraisa. I would add the following. Again, I hope the Ram would agree with me, that now the shear of nekev is revealing something about the Torah. So I want to suggest the following. After doing all this research, I come to the following two conclusions. Number one, that it's gan shayef, that halacha Moshe Misinai is not a halacha gemura kechol dinei haTorah called mitzvah doraisa, and we could be makel in halacha Moshe Misinai. But here's my second point: there are two categories of halacha Moshe Misinai, and a fundamentally different one from the other. One is halacha Moshe Misinai, which creates something brand new. Right? There's certain treifas, 7 treifas, which don't appear in the Torah at all. So halacha Moshe Misinai comes up with new categories of treifa. The Torah only has one category of treifa, that's drusa. All the rest should not. But we have halacha Moshe Misinai, which is machadesh, a brand new category, or arava, for example. Where is arava in the Torah? It ain't there. It's a brand new creation, which is called and classified as halacha Moshe Misinai. Then there's a different type of halacha Moshe Misinai, and that's halacha Moshe Misinai, which reveals something about the Torah law itself. It's not, in vacuum, if you know what I mean. It's a gilui milsa to teach me something about the doraisa. And my nafkamina, why am I so inspired to make this fundamental categorization of these two categories? Because the nafkamina is whether or not it's equal to doraisa or we drop below to doraisa. If we're talking about halacha Moshe Misinai creating something brand new, standing independent on its own 2 feet, then we can be making like the 7 treifos, like our Rava. Or I'll give you another example. The Torah says in Parshas קידוש, we read it last Shabbos, that when you come into the land, then the fruits of the land are arla for the first 3 years, etc., etc. Torah says if you come into the land. There's nothing in the Torah that indicates that in Chutz La'aretz, in Toronto, Canada, or somebody just joined that community from Montreal, Quebec, that in such a case you have to worry about arla. The entire enterprise of arla in Chutz La'aretz is halacha Moshe Misinai. And the Rambam says if you have a suffix in Chutz La'aretz, is suffix ba'halacha Moshe Misinai lekula. Because again, the halacha Moshe Misinai is creating something that's not in the Torah at all. It's not reflecting or shedding a light or defining that which is ikar min Torah. So to the extent to which halacha Moshe Misinai stands on its own, then it falls shy of a mitzvah doraisa and therefore suffix lekula. However, when it comes to the nekev, and we're dealing with tefillah, and the nekev is going to reveal something about what is a mikvah for the purpose of tefillah, and tefillah is ikar ben Torah, then in such a case, halacha Moshe Sinai is equal to a din Torah, a halacha doraisa, and yesh lahachmir b'sof. So I'm about halfway through. Now let's take the halacha Moshe Sinai of yayin or pas for kiddush in the framework of the Tosfot Rid. L'chora, I have to admit, and I'm a little disappointed to say so, but it's revealing something about the Torah. The Torah says, Zochres Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha. How do I fulfill that mitzvah of Zochres Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha? So halacha Moshe Sinai steps in and reveals that I need either yayin or pas. In such a case, I would say it's a full-fledged doraisa. No room to be making. There's no room to wiggle your toes over here. You follow what I'm saying? Now, my goal is to explain why Rava says that the mitzvahs of Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah trump the mitzvah of Yain L'Kiddush. Well, if it's halacha Moshe Sinai that we require Yain L'Kiddush, and that's reflecting and shedding a light on Zochres Yom Shabbos L'Kadsha, then how could Rava say such a thing? How could a mitzvah d'Rabbanan possibly override the mitzvah of Kiddush D'Oraisa? So it would be very nice. In Yiddish, we say lontzach, if we could say that maybe, the halacha Moshe Sinai drops down a little bit. Let's lower it down. It's not equal to a D'Oraisa. Problem is that halacha Moshe Sinai in this case is revealing something about Zochres Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha. So now I want to drop a bomb. And honestly, I don't think anyone has ever thought of this idea. If you read the Tosfot Rid carefully, as I did earlier, he says, Ein kiddush ela b'mashu kovea seudaso o b'pas o b'yayin t'chsiv v'karosa l'shabbos onik. And I asked you the following question. We're talking about a din d'oraisa here. Isn't it a chutzpah noira for the Tosfot Rid to quote a pasuk Yeshayahu Hanavi midivrei Kabbalah? Okay, v'karasol Shabbos onik, but why is that relevant? We're talking about being docha the Isur Yain L'Nazir. We're talking about a doraisa. Onik Shabbos is a very nice mitzvah. But at the best, it's only midivrei Kabbalah. It's not doraisa. So you're quoting a pasuk Yeshayahu Hanavi? I want to add another question, which is more of an etymological question. The Torah said, the Tosfot Rosh interprets this pasuk for Karasol Shabbos Oneg, and he says the following: B'makom kriya, right? It says for Karasol Shabbos. B'makom kriya, sham yehei oneg. Gibberish. I would probably do better if I was gargling something. So first of all, let me ask you, what is b'makom kriya? What does kriya mean? V'karasa l'Shabbos. What does that mean, v'karasa l'Shabbos? Call out Shabbos. Right? L'chadodi likras kala. Like the Talmidim there in Tzfat, So I have no doubt in my mind that the word karasa, or kriya, refers to Kiddush. Otherwise, why is the Tosfot Rid bothering quoting this drasha here? But now let's read it this way: B'makom kriya, meaning b'makom kiddush, sham yehei oneg. The kiddush is going to create sham yehei oneg. What does that mean? Sham yehei oneg. A makom su'uda. What do you mean a makom suda? I come back from shul. I think there's still a few shuls left over there in Canada where they still make kiddush in shul. Am I right? So I heard kiddush in shul, Lamazogin, and now I come home. I want to eat my suda, and I want to fulfill the mitzvah of Suda Shabbos. What's the problem? No. A Suda on Shabbos is not a Suda Shabbos. A Suda on Shabbos is a Suda that you eat in the place where you recited Kiddush. The Makom Kriya, in the place where you recited Kiddush, Sham Te'onig, that's where you set up your Suda Shabbos. And that's what the Tosfot Rid meant when he said before, Ein Kiddush el b'mashu kovea sudasa. What does it mean that the Kiddush is kovea the Suda? He's kovea the Suda as the Suda Shabbos. Because when the Torah talks about Suda Shabbos, it means a Suda in the place where you made Kiddush, and the Kiddush itself injects into the Suda the status, or upgrades the status of the Suda from a regular Suda, which you happen to have eaten on Shabbos, to a Suda Shabbos. In other words, it's like Hineni Muchar Mizuma. You have to be Mezamen Umiyachid this Suda as a Suda Shabbos. How do you do that? By reciting Kiddush in that place. You okay, Joe? We have to get a good night's sleep. I'm just jiving you. Anyway, this is what I want to suggest, meaning there's a relationship between Kiddush and Suda. How do you understand the relationship? Is it that Suda will impact on Kiddush? Or is that Kiddush will impact on Suda? So we always thought that he needs the Suda for the Kiddush. And Ein Kiddush al Vakum Suda is Halach in Kiddush. Name. Says the Tosfot Rid, he needs the Kiddush for the Suda. He turns everything upside down. So the kiyum here of Yayin as the mitzaref that forges the relationship between Kiddush and his Suda is the Yayin or the Pas. That will set up a makom because the makom kriya sham yayonik. That's where he'll fulfill the mitzvah of Suda Shabbos. So when the Tosfot Rid quotes the Pasuk Karasel Shabbos Oneg, he's not deriving a brand new mitzvah, which is Doraisa, from a Pasuk in Divrei Kabbalah. The Pasuk in Divrei Kabbalah is only coming to answer the question, well, you have Halacha Moshe Sinai to recite Kiddush on Yayin or Pas, which means a Su'uda. Why is that so? What's the linkage here between Kiddush and Su'uda? And for that, I need a Gili Milsa. I reveal the truth from the Pasuk in Yeshayahu Hanavi, and that's going to be the halach. Okay, Rabbosai? So, what time do we have to end? I forget. On your clock, I mean. I always get confused. I think you ended at 8 o'clock, right?
Well, actually, about 9.
At 9 o'clock.
Which is almost 10 after. It's not that bad.
Okay, so let me let you go, but I think we covered a lot today, and a radical approach to this Tosfot Rid, which is going to explain to us why we can be more mekil, and if the yayin is only there in order to establish a key mitzvah on the Suda, then it's not the same as reflecting on the mitzvah of Zachar, which would have to upgrade the Halach Moshe Sinai to a Doraisa, and we couldn't be mekil. But we can be mekil because the mitzvah of Kiddush Doraisa, you don't need yayin. You need the yayin in order to set up the Suda.
Right.
Okay, then. Go to
What do
you say?
Yeah, you said about the Christmas stars. I knew it was Yeshayahu, but I didn't have you quick enough to say it.
Yeah, Yeshayahu.
I knew it. The other thing is, I think that's on Targum Kippur morning, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
I can look it up. Look
it up if you don't mind. All right,